Hi everyone, it's Miss Carla from the local library. Hope you guys are doing well. Today we're going to read Anne of Green Gables. We are on chapter 19. So, yeah, why don't we get right into it? Chapter 19, a concert, a catastrophe, and a confession. Marilla, can I go over to see Deanna just for a minute? Asked Anne. I don't see what you want to be traipsing about after dark for, said Marilla shortly. You and Deanna walked home from school together and then stood down there in the snow for half an hour more, your tongues going the whole blessed time, clickety-clack. So I don't think you're very badly off to see her again. But she wants to see me, pleaded Anne. She has something very important to tell me. How do you know she has? Because she signals to me from her window. We have arranged a way to signal with our candles and cardboard. We set the candle on the windowsill and make flashes by passing the cardboard back and forth. So many flashes mean a certain thing. It was my idea, Marilla. I'll warrant you it was, said Marilla. And the next thing you'll be setting fire to the curtains while you're signaling nonsense. Oh, we're very careful, Marilla, and it's so interesting. 2 flashes means are you there, 3 mean yes, and 4 mean no. 5 mean come over as soon as possible because I have something important to reveal. And Deanna has just signaled 5 flashes and I'm really suffering to know what it is. Well, you needn't suffer any longer. You can go, but you're to be back here in just 10 minutes. And you remember that. Anne did remember it and was back in the stipulated time, although probably no mortal will ever know just what it cost her to confine the discussion of Deanna's important communication with the limits of 10 minutes. But at least she had made good use of them. Oh, Marilla, what do you think? You know, tomorrow's Deanna's birthday. Well, her mother told her she could ask me to go home with her from school and stay all night with her. And her cousins are coming over from Newbridge in a big pung sleigh to go to the debating club concert at the hall tomorrow night. And they are going to take Deanna and me to the concert. If you'll let me go, that is. You'll let me go, won't you, Marilla? I feel so excited. You can calm down then because you're not going. You're better at home in your own bed, and as for that club concert, it's all nonsense, and little girls should not be allowed to go to such places at all. I'm sure the debating club is a most respectable affair, pleaded Anne. I'm not saying it isn't, but you're not going to begin gadding about the concerts and staying out all hours of the night. But it's such a very special occasion, mourned Anne. Deanna has only one birthday in a year, and it isn't as if birthdays are common things, Marilla. Prissy Andrews is going to recite Curfew Must Not Ring tonight. That's such a good moral piece, Marilla. I'm sure it'll do me lots of good to hear it. And the choir are going to sing 4 lovely pathetic songs that are nearly good as hymns. Oh, and Marilla, the minister is going to take part. Yes, indeed, he is. He's going to give an address. Now, it'll be just about the same thing as a sermon. Please, may I go, Marilla? You heard what I said, Anne, didn't you? Take off your boots now and go to bed. It's past 8. There's just one more thing, Marilla, said Anne. Miss Barry told Deanna that we might sleep in the spare bedroom. Think of the honor of your little Anne being put in the spare room. It's an honor you'll have to get along without. Go to bed, Anne, and don't let me hear another word out of you. When Anne, with tears rolling down her cheeks, had gone sorrowfully upstairs, Matthew had been apparently sound asleep on the lounge during the whole dialogue, opened his eyes, and said decidedly, Well, Marilla, I think you ought to let Anne go. I don't then, retorted Marilla. Who's bringing this child up, Matthew or me? Who's bringing this child up, Matthew, you or me? Well, now you. Don't interfere then. Well, now I ain't interfering. It ain't interfering to have your own opinion. And my opinion is that you ought to let Anne go. You'd think I ought to let Anne go to the moon if she took the notion, I've no doubt. I might have let her spend the night with Diana if that was all, but I don't approve of this concert plan. She'd go there and catch a cold like as not and have her head filled up with nonsense and excitement. I think you ought to let Anne go, repeated Matthew. Argument was not a strong point, but holding fast to his opinion certainly was. Marilla gave a gasp of helplessness and took refuge in silence. The next morning, when Anne was washing the breakfast dishes in the pantry, Matthew paused on his way out to the barn to say to Marilla again, I think you ought to let Anne go. For a moment, Marilla looked things not lawful to be uttered. Then she yielded to the inevitable and said tartly, Very well. She can go, since nothing else will please you. Anne flew out of the pantry, with dripping dishcloth in hand. Oh, Marilla, say those blessed words again. I guess once is enough to say, this is Matthew's doing and I wash my hands of it. If you catch pneumonia, sleeping in a strange bed, or coming out of the hot hall in the middle of the night, don't blame me, blame Matthew. Anne Shirley, you're dripping greasy water all over the floor. I never saw such a careless child. Oh, I know I'm a great child, Marilla. I make so many mistakes. But then just think of all the mistakes I don't make. Although I might. I'll get some sand and scrub up the spots before I go to school. Oh, Marilla, my heart was just set on going to the concert. Anne was too excited to do herself justice as to lessons that morning in school. Gilbert Blythe spelled her down in class, and left her clear out of sight in mental arithmetic. Anne's consequent humiliation was less than if it might have been, however, in view of the concert in the spare room bed. She and Deanna talked so constantly about it all day that with a stricter teacher than Mr. Phillips, their dire disgrace must inevitably have been their portion. Anne felt that she could not have borne it if she had not been going to the concert, for nothing else was discussed in school that day. The Avonlea young people had been practicing for weeks, and all the scholars were especially interested in it by reason of older brothers and sisters who were going to take part. Everybody in school over 9 years of age expected to go, except Carrie Sloane, whose father shared Marilla's opinions about small girls going out to night concerts. Carrie Sloane cried into her grammar all the afternoon and felt that life was not worth living. For Anne, the real excitement began with the dismissal of school and increased therefrom in crescendo until it reached a crash of positive ecstasy in the concert itself. They had a perfectly elegant tea, and then came the delicious occupation of dressing Deanna's little room upstairs. Deanna did Anne's front hair in the new pompadour style, and Anne tied Deanna's bows with the special knack she possessed. And they experimented with at least half a dozen different ways of arranging their back hair. At last they were ready, cheeks scarlet and eyes glowing with excitement. Then Deanna's cousin, the Murrays from Newbridge, came. They all crowded into a big pung sleigh among straw and furry robes, and reveled in the drive to the hall, slipping along over the satin-smooth roads with the snow crisping under the runners. There was a magnificent sunset, and the snowy hills and deep blue water of the St. Lawrence Gulf seemed to rim in the splendor of a huge bowl of pearl and sapphire brimmed with wine and fire. Tinkles of sleigh bells and distant laughter that seemed like the mirth of wood elves came from every quarter. The program that night was a series of thrills for at least one listener in the audience, and as Anne assured Deanna, every succeeding thrill was thriller than the last. When Prissy Andrews, attired in a pink silk waist with a string of pearls about her smooth white throat and real carnations in her hair, rumor whispered that the master had sent all the way to town for her, climbed a slimy ladder, dark without one ray of light. Anne shivered in luxurious sympathy. When the choir sang far above the gentle daisies, Anne gazed at the ceiling as if it were filled with angels. When Sam Sloane proceeded to explain and illustrate how Socrates set her hand, Anne laughed until people sitting near her laughed too, more out of sympathy with her than with amusement at a selection that was rather threadbare even in Avonlea. When Mr. Phillips gave Mark Antony's oration over the dead body of Caesar in the most heart-stirring tones, looking at Prissy Andrews at every end of sentence, Anne felt that she could rise in mutiny on the spot if but one Roman citizen led the way. Only one number in the program failed to interest her. When Gilbert Blythe recited Bingen on the Rhine, Anne picked up Rhoda Murray's library book and read it until he was finished. And when she sat rigidly stiff and motionless, while Deanna clapped her hands until they tingled. It was 11 when they got home, sated with dissipation, but with exceeding sweet pleasure of talking it all over, soon to come. Everybody seemed asleep, and the house was dark and silent. Anne and Deanna tiptoed into the parlor, a long, narrow room out of which the spare room opened. It was pleasantly warm and dimly lighted by the embers of a fire in the grate. "Let's undress here," said Deanna. "It's so nice and warm." "Hasn't it been a delightful time?" said Anne. "It must be splendid to get up there and recite. Do you suppose we'll ever be asked to do it, Deanna?" "Yes, of course, someday. They're always wanting big scholars to recite. Gilbert Blythe does often. He's only 2 years older than us." "Oh, Anne, how could you pretend not to listen to him? When he came to the line, 'There's not another, not a sister,' he looked right down at you." "Deanna," said Anne with dignity, "you're my bosom friend, but I cannot allow even you to speak to me of that person. Are you ready for bed? Let's run a race and see who will get to the bed first." The suggestion appealed to Deanna. The two little white-clad figures flew down the long room through the spare door and bounded on the bed at the same moment. Then something moved beneath them, and there was a cry and a gasp, and somebody said in muffled accents, "Merciful goodness!" Anne and Deanna were never able to tell just how they got off that bed and out of the room. They only knew that after one frantic rush, they found themselves tiptoeing shiveringly upstairs. Oh, who was it? What was it? Whispered Anne. It was Aunt Josephine, said Deanna, gasping with laughter. Oh, Anne, it was Aunt Josephine. However, she came to be here. Oh, and I know she'll be furious. It's dreadful. It's really dreadful. But did you ever know anything so funny, Anne? Who's your Aunt Josephine? She's Father's aunt, and she lives in Charlottetown. She's awfully old, 70 anyhow, and I don't believe she was ever a little girl. We are expecting her out for visit, but not so soon. She's awfully prim and proper, and she'll scold dreadfully about this, I know. We'll have to sleep with Minnie May, and you can't think how she kicks. Miss Josephine Barry did not appear at the early breakfast the next morning. Miss Barry smiled kindly at the two little girls. Did you have a good time last night? I tried to stay awake until you came home, for I wanted to tell you Aunt Josephine had come, and that you would have to get upstairs after all. But I was so tired I fell asleep. I hope you didn't disturb your aunt, Deanna. Deanna preserved a discreet silence, but she and Anne exchanged smiles of guilty amusement across the table. Anne hurried home after breakfast and so remained in blissful ignorance of the disturbance which presently resulted in the Barry household until late afternoon when she went down to Miss Lynde's on an errand for Marilla. So you and Deanna nearly frightened poor old Miss Barry to death last night, said Miss Lynde severely, but with a twinkle in her eye. Miss Barry was here a few minutes ago on her way to Carmody. She's feeling really worried about it. Old Miss Barry was in a terrible temper when she got up this morning, and Josephine Barry's temper is no joke, I can tell you that. She wouldn't speak to Deanna at all. It wasn't Deanna's fault, said Anne. It was mine. I suggested racing to see who would get into the bed. I knew it, said Miss Lynde. I knew the idea came out of your head. Well, it's made a nice lot of trouble, that's what. Old Miss Barry came out to stay for a month, but she declares she won't stay another day and is going right back to town tomorrow, Sunday, and all as it is. She had gone today if they could have taken her. She promised to pay for a quarter's music lessons for Deanna, but now she's determined not to do it all for such a tomboy. Oh, I guess they had a lively time of it there this morning. The Barrys must feel caught up. Old Miss Barry is rich, and they'd like to keep on the good side of her. Of course, Miss Barry didn't just say that to me, but I'm a pretty good judge of human nature, that's what. I'm such an unlucky girl, mourned Anne. I'm always getting into scrapes myself and getting my best friends. People I'd shed my heart's blood for, into them too. Can you tell me why it is so, Miss Lynde? It's because you're too heedless and impulsive, child, that's why. You never stop to think. Whatever comes into your head to say or do it without a moment's reflection. Oh, but that's the best of it, protested Anne. Something flashes in your mind, so exciting, and you must out with it. If you stop to think it over, you spoil it all. Haven't you ever felt that yourself, Miss Lynde? No, Miss Lynde had not. She shook her head sagely. You must learn to think a little, Anne, that's what. The proverb you need to go by is look before you leap, especially into spare room beds. Miss Lynde laughed comfortably, but Anne remained pensive. She saw nothing to laugh at in the situation, which to her eyes appeared very serious. When she left Miss Lynde, she took her way across the crusted fields to Orchard Slope. Deanna met her at the kitchen door. Your Aunt Josephine was very cross about it, wasn't she? Whispered Anne. Yes, said Deanna, stifling a giggle with an apprehensive glance over her shoulder at the closed sitting room door. She was fairly dancing with rage, Anne. Oh, how she scolded. She said I was the worst behaved girl she'd ever saw, and that my parents ought to be ashamed of the way they brought me up. She says she won't say, and I don't care, but Mother and Father do. Why didn't you tell them it was my fault? Demanded Anne. It's likely I'd do such a thing, isn't it? Said Deanna with just scorn. I'm no telltale, Anne Shirley, and anyhow, I was just as much to blame as you. Well, I'm going in to tell her myself, said Anne. Deanna stared. Aunt Shirley, you'd never. Why, she'll eat you alive. Don't frighten me any more than I am frightened, implored Anne. I'd rather walk up to a cannon's mouth, but I've got to do it, Deanna. It was my fault, and I've got to confess. I've had practice in confessing, fortunately. Well, she's in the room, said Deanna. You can go in if you want to. I wouldn't dare, but I don't believe he'll do a bit of good. With this encouragement, Anne bearded the lion in its den, and that is to say, walked resolutely up to the sitting room door and knocked faintly. A sharp "come in" followed. Miss Josephine Barry, thin, prim, and rigid, was knitting fiercely by the fire, her wrath quite unappeased, and her eyes snapping through her gold-rimmed glasses. She wheeled around in a chair, expecting to see Deanna, and beheld a white-faced girl whose great eyes were brimmed up with a mixture of desperate courage and shrinking terror. "Who are you?" demanded Miss Josephine Barry without ceremony. "I am Anne of Green Gables," said the small visitor, clasping her hands with a characteristic gesture, "and I have come to confess, if you please." "Confess what?" "That was all my fault about jumping into bed on you last night. I had suggested it. Deanna would have never thought of such a thing, I'm sure. Deanna is a very ladylike girl, Miss Barry, so you must see how unjust it is to blame her." "Oh, must I?" "I rather think Deanna did her share of jumping at least. Such carryings on in a respectable house." "But we were only having fun," persisted Anne. "I think you ought to forgive us, Miss Barry. Now we've apologized. Anyhow, please forgive Deanna and let her have her music lessons. Deanna's heart is set on her music lessons, Miss Barry, and I know too well what it is to set your heart on a thing and not get it. If you must be cross with anyone, be cross with me. I've been so used in my early days to have people cross at me that I can endure it much better than Deanna can." Much of the snap had gone out of the old lady's eyes by this time, was placed by a twinkle of amused interest, but she still said severely, "I don't think it's any excuse for you that you were only in fun. Little girls never indulged in that kind of thing when I was young. You don't know what it is to be awakened by a sound asleep after a long, arduous journey by two great girls coming bouncing on you." "I don't know, but I can imagine," said Anne. "I'm sure it must have been very disturbing, but then there is our side of it too. Have you any imagination, Miss Barry? If you have, just put yourself in our place. We didn't know there was anybody in that bed, and you've nearly scared us to death. It was simply awful the way we felt. And we couldn't sleep in the spare room after being promised. I suppose you're used to sleeping in spare rooms. But just imagine what you would feel like if you were a little orphan girl who had never had such an honor." All the snap had gone by this time. Miss Barry actually laughed, a sound which caused Deanna, waiting in speechless anxiety in the kitchen outside, to give a great gasp of relief. "I'm afraid my imagination is a little rusty. It's so long since I used it," she said. "I dare say your claim to sympathy is just as strong as mine. It all depends on how the way we look at it. Sit down here and tell me about it yourself." "I'm very sorry I can't," said Anne. "I would like to, but because you seem like an interesting lady and you might even be a kindred spirit, although you don't look very much like it, but it is my duty to go home to Miss Marilla Cuthbert. Miss Marilla Cuthbert is a very kind lady who has taken me to bring up properly. She's doing her best, but it's very discouraging work. You must not blame her because I jumped on the bed. But before I go, I do wish you would tell me if you will forgive Deanna and stay as long as you meant to in Avonlea." "I think perhaps I will if you will come over and talk to me occasionally," said Miss Barry. That evening, Miss Barry gave Deanna a silver bangle bracelet and told the senior members of the household that she had unpacked her suitcase. "I made up my mind to say simply for the sake of getting better acquainted with that Anne girl," she said frankly. "She amuses me, and at my time of life an amusing person is a rarity." Marilla's only comment when she heard the story was, "I told you so," and this was for Matthew's benefit. Miss Barry stayed her month out and over. She was a more agreeable guest than usual, for Anne kept her in good humor. They became firm friends. When Miss Barry went away, she said, "Remember, you Anne girl, when you come to town, you're to visit me, and I'll put you in my very spare room bed to sleep." Miss Barry was a kindred spirit after all, Anne confided to Marilla. "You wouldn't think so looking at her, but she is. You don't find it right out at first, as in Matthew's case, but after a while you come to see it. Kindred spirits are not so scarce as I used to think. It's splendid to find out there are so many of them in the world." That was sweet. That's the end of the chapter. That was really nice. I'm so glad Anne figured it out. She's really good at apologizing, it seems. Alright guys, so next video we will do chapter 20. So make sure you tune in. We do this video on Monday and Wednesdays at noon. And yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye.